Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining the Wilson Center's Maternal Health Initiative and UNFPA, the UN Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, for the DC launch of their 2022 State of the World Population Report, Seeing the Unseen, the Case for Action in the Neglected Crisis of Unintended Pregnancy. Yesterday was World Population Day, and as the world nears a population of 8 billion, discussion like today's on unintended pregnancy, gender equality, opportunity, and rights for all could not be timelier. I'm Sarah Barnes, and I'll be your moderator today. I direct the Maternal Health Initiative at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C., and I'm joining you today from Bern, Switzerland. UNFPA and the Wilson Center have a 13-year-long partnership focused on maternal, newborn, sexual and reproductive health, and gender equity. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Wilson Center is a critical source of nonpartisan foreign policy research and analyses, where we work to tackle global issues through independent research, open and honest dialogue, and actionable ideas. At the Maternal Health Initiative, we focus on a multitude of global health and gender-related issues and their connections to U.S. foreign policy. Today's event is co-sponsored by the Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program, which focuses on the connections between climate, health, and security. Globally, half of all pregnancies are unintended. This year's State of the World Population Report examines the societal drivers and global consequences of unintended pregnancy. This report finds that high unintended pregnancy rates correlate with lower levels of social and economic development, greater gender inequality, and higher rates of maternal deaths. Consequences of unintended pregnancy and the magnitude of an unintended pregnancy on an individual or couple or family is nearly impossible to calculate. Our esteemed speakers will shed light on these topics and possible recommendations and policies to aid in decreasing the number of unintended pregnancies. And we welcome and encourage our audience to engage in this discussion by putting questions for our panel in the chat box on your screen. I am honored to launch this report at the Wilson Center's Maternal Health Initiative, particularly as the maternal health world is grappling with the U.S. Supreme Court's recent Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade and the constitutional right to an abortion in the United States. This State of the World Population Report's focus on unintended pregnancy is an incredible resource to all of us working in this space. Thank you to UNFPA for making this event possible, especially Sarah Craven and Rachel Moynihan from the DC office. And a huge thank you to my team at MHI and the incredible lineup of opening speakers and panelists we have with us here today. Today's event is a packed 60 minutes. So without further ado, it is my honor and privilege to introduce our first speaker, Secretary Javier Becerra, to provide opening remarks. Secretary Becerra is the 25th Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services and the first Latino to hold the office in the history of the United States. As Secretary, he carries out President Biden's vision to build a healthy America and focuses on ensuring that all Americans have health security and access to healthcare. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. It is an honor to have you join us to discuss such a timely topic. Thank you for making the time to be here today. The floor is yours.
Sarah, thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. Thank you to the United Nations Population Fund and to the Wilson Center for inviting me to join you today. It's very important, especially given recent events. I am delighted to help celebrate the launch of the 2022 State of the World Population Report. The gathering here today takes place, as I just mentioned, at a pivotal moment for us in America and for all of us who care about or should be prepared to deal with this recent development when it comes to sexual and reproductive health and rights around the world for Americans, for people everywhere, and certainly for women. Roughly 2 weeks ago, the United States Supreme Court did something unconscionable. It stripped away a constitutional right from the Americans here who depend on access to good care, reproductive care, when it overturned Roe versus Wade, and it restricted access to safe abortion. I happened to be in the state of Missouri in St. Louis that very day, that morning of the decision. I was speaking to doctors and patients at the last abortion clinic in the state. The impact of the decision was immediate, it was severe, and it left people visibly shaken. After my visit there in St. Louis, I traveled across the state line into the state of Illinois, just a few miles away, where it was still lawful to receive abortion care. There, I visited with people who were offering caring service to people in need of healthcare and reproductive services, including abortion care. It was shocking that in the United States of America, a short distance traveled could make such a difference in the life of a woman. The dire and draconian difference became starkly real for so many people when it came to healthcare. I saw the restrictions firsthand by being there in Missouri when the decision was announced. And I saw how women and families were feeling the unequal treatment that now the Supreme Court had forced upon them. And in the days after the decision, we've already seen the draconian consequences. Every day we hear new and heartbreaking stories of young women unable to get the care they need, of healthcare providers afraid to do their job, to fulfill their Hippocratic oath, and to provide people with the care that they need. But we can't afford to simply throw up our hands up in despair. We need to act. And that's exactly what we are doing at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services on the instructions of President Joe Biden. Last week, I directed every part of my department to do everything and anything possible to make sure that we continue to make access to abortion care available to women everywhere in America, including increasing access to medication abortion, protecting patient privacy and non-discrimination for those seeking care, protecting healthcare providers so they can fulfill their profession and legal obligation, and taking every legal step available to protect family planning services. Around the world, we remain committed to investing in high quality, client-centered sexual and reproductive health services that improve women's well-being, promote gender equality, and ensure women have control over their own body and their own future. Our commitment to global family planning spans more than 5 decades. We are dedicated champions of maternal health care, and we are there to help prevent gender-based violence. And mark my words, the United States will continue its efforts to make pregnancy and childbirth safer and meet sexual and reproductive healthcare needs of all. Because these evidence-based efforts do far more to protect lives, to protect families, and to protect the health and well-being of everyone. Under President Biden's leadership, our nation is supporting UNFPA's essential work to prevent maternal deaths, expand access to voluntary family planning, and prevent and respond to gender-based violence around the world and in humanitarian settings. And together, the US and UNFPA's efforts continue more than 40% of donated global family planning supplies. Ultimately, this work is far bigger than the current battle in my country. It's about making sure that every one of us, no matter who we are, who we love, or where we live, has the opportunity to live a healthy and fulfilling life. That is the promise we make today. That is a promise we must make to all of our citizens. That is the future the world deserves. And that's why we will work with you in support of every effort to make sure that promise is fulfilled. I thank you for having me. I look forward to the success of our work together. Please have a good session.
Thank you so much, Secretary Becerra. I think if we were in person, we would all be on our feet right now. So thank you very much again for your time. And I also wanted to thank all of those at HHS who helped to make this possible, especially Stephanie Pisaki. And it's been such a pleasure working with all of you. And we know you need to leave shortly for another engagement, and we will be sure to share the entire event recording with you and your colleagues post-event. Thank you so much. So next up, we have Representative Chrissy Houlihan, who joins us via recording. Representative Houlihan is a dynamic member of the U.S. House of Representatives. She is an Air Force veteran, engineer, entrepreneur, and educator who is continuing her career of service as the first ever woman to represent Pennsylvania's 6th District in Congress. Representative Houlihan serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and is an inspiring leader and champion for women and girls around the world.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chrissy Houlihan, and I represent Pennsylvania's 6th District in the United States Congress. I spoke at the UNFPA report launch last year, and I'm honored to be back again to talk about such an important cause. Thank you to the UNFPA for having me here and for the very meaningful work that you all do. It's a pleasure to join you, even virtually, at today's Washington launch of the UNFPA's State of the World Population Report, Seeing the Unseen. This report covers the crisis of unintended pregnancy, a subject which feels especially pressing as our nation grapples with its own fight over reproductive rights and freedoms. But even in the middle of such a polarizing political conflict, this report serves as an important reminder of a cause that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle should agree on. That is addressing the root causes of the 121 million unintended pregnancies that occur every year, nearly half of all pregnancies worldwide. Left unaddressed to this crisis will continue to have global repercussions. You all know better than anyone that this is not a simple problem, nor is it just a woman's issue. This is a personal issue, a health issue, a human rights issue, a development issue, a humanitarian issue, and it's all on us to work towards solutions to all of these issues. In my role on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I'm very proud to be the lead sponsor of the Support the UNFPA Funding Act to ensure that the vital work of this agency can continue. My bill has 134 co-sponsors, and it's endorsed by 99 civil society and NGO sponsors, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, Amnesty International, Foreign Policy for America, and Planned Parenthood. As I said when I reintroduced this bill last June, my legislation aims not only to fund an entity that saves lives, but also to remind Americans that investing internationally in family planning and women's health makes the U.S. more secure as well. Because when we invest in global efforts to support and protect women and families, we are in fact investing in national security too. That's not just true for America. Wherever women can access quality health services and thrive, stability, security, and peace will follow. What I couldn't have known last summer was just how critical UNFPA's role would be in the year to come. The events that have unfolded in Afghanistan and Ukraine shine a very bright spotlight on the unique needs of women in crisis. Fortunately, organizations like this one are working hard to help. As of last week, UNFPA had delivered 105 metric tons of reproductive health equipment and supplies to hospitals and youth-friendly health clinics across Ukraine, Moldova, and Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, UNFPA continues to scale up family health houses, which are often the sole source of healthcare for rural communities. What's important to underscore is that in both Ukraine and Afghanistan, UNFPA was there before and during these periods of crisis and remains active in both countries, ready to respond quickly in times of need. And I'm really pleased to report that the support will continue. The 2023 House State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill includes $70 million for UNFPA funding. And I'll keep pushing to get that funding over the finish line to the people who need it. The crisis of unintended pregnancy does not exist in isolation. When women and girls are forced to flee from what is familiar, whether that's their local healthcare provider or the safety of their communities, that can manifest in unintended pregnancies during the most vulnerable times in their lives. That's why the work of UNFPA is so critical. But like I said, this is a cause that requires action from all of us. For me, that means fighting for funding so this work can continue It means supporting programs here and abroad that address this often unseen crisis. For our country, it means strengthening health and education systems, which are key to ensuring that all people are empowered with the knowledge and support to plan if and when to become pregnant. And it means strengthening justice systems, which are critical to holding perpetrators of sexual violence and coercion to account. But knowing what needs to be done is not the same as doing it. And I'm committed to putting in the work to support the mission of the UNFPA. And I am confident that I have colleagues on both sides of the aisle who share that commitment as well. Thank you so much for your time, for having me today, and for your work to ensure equality for all. It is truly an honor to work with you.
Thank you very much, Representative Houlihan and team, for providing those really dynamic opening comments and strong endorsements of the State of the World's Population Report, and for our partners at UNFPA. This leads us to our opening presentation, which will focus on the State of the World's Population Report and some of its key findings. We're thrilled to have Sarah Craven here to present today. Sarah is the director of UNFPA's Washington, D.C. office, where she worked with American leaders on supporting essential sexual and reproductive health. I just wanted to make a note of terminology before I turn things over to Sarah in language for the report. I'm going to read it right from the report just so it's very clear. And it's a note on terminology. Language is important when we talk about unintended pregnancy. Unintended pregnancies are not the same as unwanted pregnancies, and pregnant individuals are not the same as mothers. Not all individuals who become pregnant are women and girls. Transgender men and non-binary people can and do become pregnant. They also face serious barriers to non-judgmental sexual and reproductive health care and contraception, increasing their risk of unintended pregnancy. However, the data used in this report overwhelmingly come from surveys and studies that identify participants as women or girls. Therefore, this report refers generally to the pregnancy risks facing women and girls, while acknowledging in many places that these same risks are also born of gender diverse individuals. And with that, I turn things over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Sarah. I just want to start by saying thank you so much to Secretary Becerra and his team at HHS for kicking this report launch off today, and also thanking Representative Chrissy Houlihan and our panelists, who you are all going to hear from today. It is exciting. This report could not be more timely. Seeing the unseen, the case for action in the neglected crisis for unintended pregnancy. UNFPA has been launching this report worldwide, and today, just one day after World Population Day, we're having the virtual launch for the United States. And thank you again to the Wilson Center for being such a fantastic partner. So next slide. Okay, half. This is the proportion of pregnancies that are unintended. That is 121 million unintended pregnancies every year. 1 in 2 pregnancies take place in the bodies of people who did not affirmatively choose pregnancy or motherhood, who are not open to the prospect of having a child at that time with that partner in those circumstances. For these women, the most life-altering reproductive choice, whether to become pregnant or not, is no choice at all. This is an unseen crisis unfolding right before our eyes. Slide. But I have to say, this is not a report about abortion, and this is not a report about motherhood. This is a report about whether and how much the world values women and girls beyond their reproductive capacities. It's about what happens before a pregnancy, the information not received, the contraceptives not used, the conversation not had between partners. It is about hostility to and misinformation about contraceptive use that undermines women's ownership of their own bodies. And it is about the incalculable intergenerational crisis borne by women, girls, families, communities, countries, and the world. Slide. Unintended is not the same as unwanted. Many unintended pregnancies are welcomed, celebrated. These are unintended but wanted and moments of great joy. But more than 60% of unintended pregnancies end in abortion. These are unintended and unwanted. Slide. So what about abortion? I say this report is not about abortion, but it is relevant. Research shows rates of unintended pregnancy tend to be lower in countries with more liberal abortion laws compared to those with more restrictive laws. In low and middle income countries, restrictive abortion laws were not shown to reduce recourse to abortion. And among high income countries, those with liberal abortion laws, a smaller proportion of unintended pregnancies resulted in abortion compared to those with restrictive laws. Slide. So what? What does it all mean? What does this report say? And I should have started from the outset. You can get this report if you go to our website, www.unfpa.org, and we will also follow up to everyone with a link. I should have said that from the beginning, but I'll give you a quick overview of what we're saying in this report. Why would national borders influence on incidents of unintended pregnancy? It's because this issue cannot be reduced to personal responsibility, morality, or behavior. It is also about policy decisions and national development. We cannot focus on the stereotype of an unmarried pregnant teen. Married women, premenopausal women, and LGBTQI people all experience unintended pregnancies in alarming numbers. Every method of contraception has a failure rate. Abstinence is no guarantee. Sexual violence is rampant, and among women who rely on periodic abstinence for contraception, 40% discontinue within 12 months. Bottom line, essentially every fertile woman can experience unintended pregnancy. Unintended pregnancy is a cause and an effect of gender discrimination and of restrictions on the agency and bodily autonomy of women and girls. Reducing rates of unintended pregnancy will help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by increasing women's agency and ability to fulfill their potential, improving outcomes for families and societies at large. Slide. Now, I don't know if it might be hard to see this slide, but what we are learning about unintended pregnancy is of all the correlations this report explored, the one that stood out the most was that between gender inequality and unintended pregnancy. We found that unintended pregnancy rates are higher in countries with high levels of gender inequality. This is new. Slide. Again, the report provides an overview of features that are spread throughout the report, stories that talk about, provide a human face, a relatable face when it can often be very heavy and data heavy text. So I encourage you to look through the report, find these stories. They're inspiring, they're heartbreaking, but they're the real stories of real people who faced unintended pregnancy and all of the consequences around that. And next slide. So what do we recommend? We recommend prioritizing prevention. Unintended pregnancies are preventable if we empower women and girls to make affirmative decisions about sexuality and motherhood. For this to happen, we must guarantee access to the broadest range of contraceptives and quality sexual and reproductive health care. We need to educate young people about sexuality and reproduction. We need to reduce gender inequality. We need to increase access to education and employment opportunities for women and girls to encourage them to postpone pregnancy. And we need to invest in contraceptive research to reduce side effects, increase acceptability, and create more male-controlled options. Last slide. And last, I'm just going to end this and turn it over to our panel, but I just wanted to close by showing the design of this report, because the art throughout this report reflects what we're trying to accomplish. The report is building a case that this is a real crisis. We know many people will not want to see it that way. When most people talk about pregnancy, they talk about a pregnant belly, they think about a baby. We want them to look past those preconceptions to also see the women who are affected. This report is collecting evidence, like a detective or a prosecutor, and laying out a case for why the world should care. So I now turn it over to you, Sarah Barnes, and our wonderful panel. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And again, thank you to UNFPA. And that was an outstanding overview and definitely puts us in a strong position to head into our panel discussion. And as Sarah mentioned, for those of you watching online, we will share a link to the full report when we share the event recording with you tomorrow. And just a reminder, you can ask questions directly to the panel. Just put them in the chat box that's right below the video that you're watching on the event page. And then I will do my best to get your questions to the panel. You can also follow the discussion on Twitter at Wilson_MHI. Now to turn things over to our esteemed panel, a huge thank you to Moses Bawiri, Gayatri Patel, and Gilda Sedge for joining us today to share your perspectives on the report and unintended pregnancy more broadly, as well as recommendations and policy solutions. So I'll introduce all three of you, and then we'll start with a round of questions. First, Moses Bawiri. Moses is the founder and executive director of Peer-to-Peer Uganda. Peer-to-Peer Uganda works towards social transformation and access to health services among youth in Uganda. Welcome, Moses. Next is Gayatri Patel. Gayatri is the Vice President of External Relations at the Women's Refugee Commission, where she leads the organization's advocacy efforts and oversees both advocacy and communications. She previously served as the Director of Gender Advocacy at CARE USA. Welcome. And next we have Gilda Sedge. Gilda is a research scientist who served as an advisor for the State of the World Population Report. She previously served as a principal research scientist at the Guttmacher Institute, where her areas of expertise included levels and trends in unmet need for contraception in developing countries, women's reasons for contraceptive non-use, and abortion levels and trends worldwide. So welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. So my first question is really an opportunity to get to the heart of the report, but to also give each of you a few minutes to give us a greater sense of your work and background as it relates to unintended pregnancy. And my question is, what did you find the most valuable or surprising finding in this report as it relates to your work? And Gilda, since you were a part of putting this report together, we would very much like to have you kick us off.
Sure, thank you. Hi. I would say that what I found most valuable and what was a particular strength of this report is how it brings together a large body of evidence that I haven't seen brought together as comprehensively before, and including and particularly new evidence on the causes of unintended pregnancy, its incidence and some of the consequences of unintended pregnancy. And some of the facts that I found most compelling in this report are that nearly half of all pregnancies are unintended, as you've already heard, and about 6% of women of childbearing age have an unintended pregnancy every year. And also more than half of unintended pregnancies end in abortion. So there are about 4 abortions for every 100 women of childbearing age each year. And that may or may not sound like a lot, but what it means is that over the course of a woman's life, 1 in 4 women will have an abortion. So I found that those are some of the facts that I found particularly compelling in the report. I also would highlight the evidence that was presented for the first time in this report that was generated for the report. And that is, as you've already heard from Sarah, that unintended pregnancy, if you look across the countries in the world, unintended pregnancy is higher in those countries with high gender inequality. That is where girls don't get as much schooling as boys, where women don't play as large a role in the workforce, and where they're not as well represented in government. And it looks like unintended pregnancy is both a cause and a consequence of gender inequality, but it's a cycle that can and should be broken with the kinds of policies and programs that Sarah Craven just talked about. But it's also unintended pregnancy is common across all countries in the world. And one of the other things that I found particularly engaging and useful about this report is that it helps us see the women behind all of these different statistics and facts. And we were demonstrated through the evidence that unintended pregnancy occurs in all population subgroups. For example, younger women and older women of childbearing age, married and unmarried women, all are at risk of, and many of whom experience unintended pregnancies, with patterns that tend to defy stereotypes. So I think really the bottom line for me that I think came across from this report is that essentially every fertile woman can experience an unintended pregnancy. So it's not a crisis of a few, it's a crisis that we pretty much all share.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gilda.
Sure.
Next, Moses.
Yes, sir. Yes, for me, one of the findings that I get to look through the report that we have been able to see that UNFPA has been able to push forward for 2022. It's like just how Gilda said, it brings a lot of evidence to influence and show exactly where we are as the world in terms of unintended pregnancies, and then also realizing that we are failing to learn from history. There is a lot of amazing work that has been done over the years across the different countries, including Uganda, the country where I come from. But we are still struggling to play our individual roles as different stakeholders, but also as leaders in power. There has remained a major gap in terms of the policies that we are allowing our populations to access and also have that opportunity to have bodily autonomy, and then also influence the work that we are able to do in terms of program design and research programming.
Thank you very much, Moses. You were cutting out a little bit there, so if that happens again later, we'll ask you to turn your camera off to see if it's more clear. Thank you. Okay, Gayatri, please, to you, what did you find most surprising or most interesting in the report?
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you again to the Wilson Center for hosting this event, and thank you to UNFPA for this beautiful report. I think that what was incredibly valuable about the report is that it really goes beyond sexual and reproductive health and rights as a health issue alone, but it really emphasizes and recognizes and names some of the linkages to development, to gender equality, to education, to economic empowerment, and the role that factors such as age and agency play in this process. And it also really frames the issue both in terms of individual impact, but also in terms of broader impact on health systems, on workforces, and on societies. So, I work for the Women's Refugee Commission, and our role is really as a research organization and advocacy organization. And so in our work, we see firsthand the harmful impacts that unintended pregnancies have on displaced women, refugee women, women and girls, and others from marginalized groups, and how factors such as displacement can really exacerbate these repercussions. So we see how adolescent girls are particularly affected by disruptions in education and child and early marriage, and really the stigma and discrimination that comes with them even seeking contraception. So really some of the barriers there, but also factors such as disability and the high bar that persons with disabilities have to climb in order to access just basic care and sexual and reproductive health and rights services. And so it's so critically important that this report highlights these issues and really just bottom line reinforces how sexual and reproductive health and rights is really inextricably linked to gender equality and ensuring the full range of human rights for women, girls, and other individuals with diverse gender identity or expression. This is a really powerful message, a really powerful call to action, and we certainly can't ignore it.
Thank you very much, Gayatri. And hopefully, Moses, when you come off mute again, our connection will be more secure. We can test it with this next question. So one of the things we really wanted to achieve during this discussion today, and we're already getting questions about that as well from our audience, is looking at policies that you think could be most impactful to reduce unintended pregnancies. You know, if we can speak a bit to the policies that are already in place or things that are more ambitious that you'd like to see in place that could help us lower numbers around unintended pregnancy. And for the remainder of this discussion, we'll just have you kind of jump in as you like and just unmute so that I know you're going to respond to the question. So who would like to jump in first to talk about policies?
I'm
Guys,
happy.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, sorry. Zilda.
I'll be brief.
Well, I mean, go ahead.
I would say I'll be brief. This one of the immediate causes of unintended pregnancy for many women is not using a contraceptive method. So one of the most direct ways that we can help prevent unintended pregnancies is by meeting women's needs for contraception. And more than 200 million women in the world don't want to get pregnant and yet aren't using a method. And that's another thing that came out in this report is what are some of the reasons why women aren't using a method? And that speaks to some of the policies and programs that we can instate to help women overcome those obstacles. And those reasons have really changed over the past 20 years or 30 years. In the 80s, most women who weren't using a method while they didn't want to get pregnant said they didn't know about contraceptive options. And was the most common reason. And now it's the least common reason for not using a method. Now, women's barriers to using a method have to do with their concerns about the methods themselves and their side effects, needing a method that suits their particular needs at that point in their life, needing a range of options, needing quality counseling on the methods, that the side effects that they can expect from methods. So one of the immediate things we could do is improve the quality and range of contraceptive services available so that they're more responsive to women's needs, and develop methods that are better and that have fewer side effects and that women are more willing to use. I'm sure that Gayatri, you have a broader set of contextual policies that I think are at least as powerful and compelling. So I will pass to you.
Thanks, Gilda. I'm really glad you went first because I fully agree with everything you said. I just wanted to add that particularly making sure that access to long-acting and reversible contraceptives is available would be a really important policy mechanism and a policy objective to prioritize. But I think, going along with this theme of unintended pregnancies is caused by a range of factors related to gender equality, I think we can look more broadly at policies that advance agency, bodily autonomy, gender equality in a number of ways. So I was really struck in the report how the connection was made between economic empowerment and engagement in the workforce and unintended pregnancies. And it really, to me, strikes me as there should be investments in women's economic empowerment so that they can continue their education, build income generating skills, participate in economic life, pursue livelihoods, so that they can increase their own agency, but also their ability to afford the financial costs that come with accessing contraceptives. I think it's a really interesting and a critical moment to focus on prevention of gender-based violence. Again, the report really makes it clear that there's a real connection between practices like intimate partner violence, sexual violence, and unintended pregnancies. And we all know that GBV is a violation of human rights, but also a symptom of gender inequality. So, if we're looking at the data, and it's really quite telling that, one of the statistics in the report was that women who are experiencing intimate partner violence are twice as likely to have a male partner refuse to use contraception and twice as likely to report an unintended pregnancy. We really need to look at how to prevent and mitigate the impacts of gender-based violence. And one policy point here is we have to go beyond criminalizing gender-based violence to really look at disrupting the underlying social norms and gender norms that are driving it. So that's a critical point for policymakers to take on and to ensure that support for survivors is available. And then finally, I'm just going to end by saying comprehensive sexuality education is so critically important, particularly for adolescent girls and youth. And the fact that complications from pregnancy is the leading cause of death for adolescent girls between 15 and 19 years old is truly unconscionable, and particularly because we can prevent it. So policies that focus on expanding comprehensive sexuality is critically important.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you both for those comments. It's really important to continue the policy conversation. Moses, please. And just to add to this question, we also got a question from the audience. If you know, you can speak to Uganda and the peer-to-peer program or others. If you know of successful programs in Uganda, in your case, that have helped to prevent or manage or avoid adolescent pregnancy, have you seen successes in your own work?
Yes, thank you very much. I hope I'm now a little bit more clear with no echoes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So yes. So in Uganda, we as peer-to-peer Uganda, we are implementing a number of programs, and also contributing towards addressing problems around unintended pregnancy for adults and girls and young women of reproductive age. But one of the major challenges that we continue facing as a third world country is policies that are not actually speaking to the actual problems in the communities. Looking at some of our own statistics as a country that we have, where you're having about 23% of Uganda's population, being people coming from the rural communities that are able to access contraceptives and family planning methods. Yet when you look at the urban communities, we are having at around 39%. This is also purely influenced by the lack of financial independence by most of women of working class, who are not able to afford the contraceptive methods of choice when they try to access them from the health facilities, but then also secondly, the lack of that autonomy to be able to access programs that are empowering them in terms of economic empowerment and youth livelihood of the nature. So what we are doing as an organization is we are trying to extend such opportunities in terms of capacity building, in terms of mentorship programs, trying to extend seed funds to those groups of young women of reproductive age, both in and out of school, so that they are able to financially be able to be independent and take decisions that influence their lives and be able to have children by choice, not by chance. Over to you.
You know what, you cut out for that last comment.
My last comment was being able to have, the financial independence for all women and girls of reproductive age, both in and out of school, so that they are able to, have children by choice, not by chance.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Moses, for that. And we have several questions coming in from the audience that we will get to in a few moments. But audience, if you have a question, now is the time to put that in the chat, as we just have 15 minutes left of our event today. So I have a couple more questions myself, but I might just pose both questions and then you all can pick or choose which to respond to. One is something we've been talking about with the opening remarks already, which is the recent Supreme Court decision on Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, which overturned Roe v. Wade. And the question is whether you see this affecting the global community and what you see as the ripple effects of this decision. While based in the US, how do we see that impacting communities outside of the United States? So that's one question. The second question is quite different, but still focuses on the US in terms of what do you feel, and what came through in the report that you see as the responsibility of the United States government in addressing the costs associated with unintended pregnancy and sexual reproductive health issues globally through foreign policy or global health assistance. So it's the U.S. role in those two ways. Gilda, please, thank you for unmuting.
Sure, I'll go to the first question. The U.S. decision, Supreme Court decision in Dobbs. First, I would contextualize it to point out that it runs counter to the global trends with respect to abortion laws. Since 2000, the beginning of this century, 28 countries changed their abortion laws, and 26 of those countries moved to broaden the grounds for access to legal abortion. The US and Nicaragua are the only two countries in the world that have restricted legal access to abortion in this century. But abortion is still legally restricted in a number of low and middle income countries. So 40% of women live still under restrictive abortion laws. And we know from looking at the evidence, slicing it in a lot of different ways, trends over time, cross-sectional, et cetera, that abortion is as common where it's illegal as where it's illegal. What's different is that abortion is much more likely to be unsafe where it's illegal. To go more directly to your question about what are the potential reverberations of this decision, it could have far-reaching implications in other countries. The US is a leader in many ways and an influencer, and perhaps conservative movements in other countries will be emboldened by this decision. But in this year as well, earlier this year, the WHO issued new safe abortion guidelines, and they actually recommended lifting policy and legal barriers to abortion. And these are evidence-based guidelines. And they even endorse providing abortion through telemedicine in certain settings. So the US is moving in one direction and evidence-based guidelines are moving in another. And it remains to be seen whether other countries will follow the US precedent of setting policy based on ideology, or will continue to follow the evidence as reflected in the WHO guidelines.
Thank you, Gilda. Gayatri or Moses, do either of you want to speak to either of those questions? Gayatri, please.
Moses, why don't you go ahead?
Moses, go ahead.
Okay, I'll jump in the meantime.
To push towards that, try to speak about is the power of involvement in trying to push for women's access to contraceptive methods, family planning, and access to SRHR information and services is very important for a third world country, for example, like Uganda, where we live in a male-dominated environment where men are people in most of the power positions across the board. So male involvement also comes in very pivotal. And I would like to end at that juncture in terms of my submission at that level. Then probably Patel could come in on the other question.
Great, thank you, Moses. Gayatri.
Thanks, Sarah. To answer the question about Dobbs, I mean, the decision really reflects not only attacks on reproductive choice, but also broad and purposeful attacks on gender equality and equity. And this isn't hyperbole. I mean, without the right to decide if, when, and with whom to have children, women, girls, and others who are able to get pregnant will face a myriad of regressions to their rights, to their well-being, to their safety, to their economic empowerment, to their meaningful participation in public life, to equality in their homes and communities. So the impact is much broader than just one particular medical procedure. It has impacts on lives. I think the biggest impact from a humanitarian perspective is that we already face challenges in having sexual and reproductive health and rights services prioritized during crises. we know, and policymakers should know, that access to SRH, including contraception, including abortion, is one of the first services to be lost when a crisis emerges. And in fact, a landscaping study that the Women's Refugee Commission conducted covering 2018 to 2020, 1/4 of health programs across 20 humanitarian organizations surveyed did not include contraceptive services. And so it's not being prioritized, and it's certainly not seen as a critical or life-saving intervention, despite how critical and life-saving it really is. And so, you know, we really have to think about how the impact of the United States, you know, regressing on the constitutional right to abortion will have a chilling effect on programs that are already underfunded and underprioritized in some of the most dire circumstances around the world, and really think through how we can, you know, right the ship and make sure that those services are available and continue to be available to women, girls, and others in emergencies.
Great, thank you. Very important points to bring into this discussion. Thank you for that. We are going to move to the audience Q&A, and we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to, we have 3 questions so far. Sarah Craven, if you'd want to come back in for the Q&A, please feel free. There you are. So our first question, and I'm going to kick this one over to Gilda, is from Kathleen Mogelgard, the president and CEO of Population Institute. And the question is, for decades, the reproductive health community has used the indicator of unintended pregnancy as a way to measure the effectiveness of family planning programs. And yet unintended pregnancy is not always an adverse outcome for individual women and couples, and does not serve as a comprehensive measure of a person's satisfaction with their reproductive health care. What are some of the ways we can contextualize the measure of unintended pregnancy to better reflect the goal of person-centered reproductive health care? That's a big question. We touched on it in some of the other
That's right.
earlier parts, but go ahead, Gilda, do your best.
It's a really important question, and I'm glad in some ways that the question includes parts of the answer, which makes it easier for me. But it's it does deserve highlighting that while we speak, because it's easier when we're presenting data and collecting data, it's easier to speak of pregnancy as in binary terms, dichotomously as either intended or unintended. And that's what most of the data around the world offer us, is information on whether the woman said it was intended or unintended when she got pregnant. But there's a lot more to it. And almost any of us, so many of us can speak to this even from personal experience, but staying with the broad evidence, a person's going to have a wide range of feelings about pregnancy and child and being a mother and being pregnant at any point in her time, and those feelings are going to evolve over time. And also, as someone mentioned earlier, a pregnancy could be unplanned or unintended, but it could still be very much wanted, or it can become wanted as a woman goes on to have a child and come to very much love this child. And all of this, I think, we would all agree, needs to be acknowledged and recognized in how we understand and interpret the evidence. I'm hoping others in the group can speak more articulately and add to what that means for the policies and programs that we need to be offering. But it does include that we need to offer a range of ways for a woman to contend with that pregnancy when it occurs. The fact that 60% of them end in abortion does indicate that many of these pregnancies are unwanted, even as they are at the same time that they are unintended, or that a woman is not in a point in her life where she can take care of that child. Did she have it?
Thank you, Gilda. And I definitely think this question garners a much larger conversation than we have today in these final moments, but I'm glad we could touch on it here today. We have 2 more questions from the audience, and that's going to be it for today. So we do ask everyone to stay engaged, and we will continue answering questions in other forms after the event today. So the 2 questions that we have, one is, how can advocates leverage the findings from this report to help make sexual reproductive health and rights issues less polarizing globally? And what programs are there that try to educate men or engage men about their responsibilities around the issue of unintended pregnancy? Anyone want to jump in for either of those? Sarah, go for it.
I guess I just want to say, I want to kind of build on lots of things that all the panelists have said, but I just want to say on the how can we leverage the report, and maybe what we've all been talking about is how personal this decision is. And each person, everyone who's tuning in today, knows a woman who has faced an unintended pregnancy, an unwanted pregnancy, or very much wanted pregnancy. And I think at the core, a lot of this report is about listening to women and girls, hearing their stories and telling their stories. And I think we need to do a lot more listening and telling. And at the core of this, involving women and girls in being the center of decision making. So that would be my how we leverage is listen to the women around you and tell their stories.
Fantastic, thank you. Does anyone have any final comments on the engagement of men? Moses.
Thank you. What we are doing at Peer-to-Peer Uganda in terms of male involvement or engagement of men in on the issue that is arising in the report is, we are having what we call community peer support groups for the out of school young women of reproductive age, where we encourage their husbands or their spouses to come and join whenever we are having these community peer support groups, so that they're also able to understand exactly what kind of empowerment their women trying to they're receiving or attaining from our programming. In that, it becomes very easy for an empowered woman to relate with a man who has seen the transition of this woman being able to decide, when do I want to have children, which kind of contraceptive methods do I want to engage in, and all those different things. If I'm engaging in an economic empowerment initiative, how am I using them, and how am I using my resources in terms of income that I'm getting from all these initiatives? So it's about being able to move the journey together, instead of having a woman who is empowered, who is looking more like a threat to the male that they are married to or interacting with in society. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Gayatri, do you have any final comments before we close out? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Sarah. I'll just close by saying that, as advocates, we really have to remind ourselves that human suffering and the costs of unintended pregnancy are preventable and avoidable. The U.S. is a huge donor, humanitarian donor, development donor, and really should be leveraging that power and that platform to invest in targeted SRHR interventions, but also this broader constellation of issues that advance gender equality writ large, and really kind of focus on centering on human rights and human dignity. And as Sarah Craven said, the voice and the inherent power of women and girls. And so I think that the United States is really well positioned to do that. It should take up the mantle and do it.
Excellent. I think that's a fantastic place to stop today. Thank you all so much for being here today. Your comments and your expertise on this topic are just incredible to listen to. And I know we've all learned a lot from all of your points. And we will be sharing the recording of the full event by tomorrow at the latest on the Wilson Center event page. We'll also be creating a summary of today's event that we will publish on our blog. So to close, a huge thank you to Secretary Becerra and Representative Houlihan for taking the time to address this very important topic with us. And also thank you to Sarah Craven and Moses and Gilda and Gayatri for your commentary and thoughtful responses. And again, thank you to my team at MHI and for our AV team. And then lastly, to our audience for coming with us on this journey today and for submitting such thoughtful questions. Thank you for tuning in, and I wish all of you a wonderful remainder of your day. Thank you.